Okay, so today we're going to talk about action items, meeting minutes, project timeline. So it's going to build upon the knowledge that we already gained with filing emails, sending file transfers, things like that. So really, we're talking about managing project to-dos. So you might be doing that via spreadsheets or emails or Outlook tasks now, but we'll talk about how we manage that through Newforma with being able to assign action items, track them in Newforma and on InfoExchange, run reports, etc. We'll also talk about capturing meeting minutes. So while you're in meetings and you have a lot of things that are, going on, how you can capture that and have it associated to the project. So we'll look at adding the meetings, setting the agenda, sending the PDF of all of the agenda ahead of time. So with that invitation, how you could do that. It's not going to create the Outlook meeting. So we'll talk about how we can add it from Outlook or create the Newforma meeting from the Outlook meeting or create it directly in Newforma, but how we look at that PDF of the meeting notes, how we could track any discussion items, so other Newforma items that we want to make sure to discuss during the meeting, and send those meeting minutes out to people who attended the meeting afterwards. They could see, all of those meeting minutes kind of compressed, but also to people who weren't able to make the meeting, we could also send them the meeting minutes after the fact so that they could see what was discussed and what things we took action on, as well as any other new items that maybe came up during that meeting. And then, of course, our project timeline. So our project calendar, how we would see that in Newforma. We can set phases and milestones. And then also, so that all of you know, the meetings, the action items, those also show up on the project calendar by default. And we can, kind of see it in a calendar view, but we can also share the calendar, but also synchronize with Outlook so that we can have it as a separate calendar that we can overlay on top of our existing calendar, and it will actually synchronize with Newforma at the top of every hour. So those phases, milestones, meetings, those types of things will synchronize with that calendar that we have with Outlook that we can kind of overlay. So we're going to break it down into the three sections: the action items, the meeting minutes, the project timeline, and we'll see kind of how that all interacts as we go along. So let's hop into my training environment. We're going to come back here as Howard, and we're going to really be talking about the action items, the meeting minutes, the project timeline, those three activity centers. We'll start with action items. And like I said before, we can always create action items either directly in Newforma or from an Outlook email. So let's talk about it kind of first in Newforma, then we'll talk about it with Outlook, and we'll actually create the action item from the Outlook email as well, because that seems to be a lot of the ways that most things come about, but just know that you can also create them here in Newforma. From the Activity Center, the dropdown will show you all of the action items for the project as a whole. So you can kind of see things from a top-down perspective. So not just things that I'm involved in, but really any of the action items for that particular project. And then it breaks it down into open. So even within the open, we can kind of see the subsets of awaiting assignment. So we can create a project to do, an action item, and not assign it to someone because maybe we don't know who is going to take care of that item when we create it. Maybe we have a meeting later, and then at that point we'll decide who's going to take care of that item. So we could see things that are awaiting assignment, things that are due within the next 8 days, for example, or overdue. In my case, anything red here is overdue, so most of my things are overdue. And then anything that is action complete. So we'll talk about the difference between completed and action completed when we take a look at creating that item. Anything closed or deferred. But just know that you can always identify an action item directly in Newforma. It will be the same form that we're going to see when we create the item from Outlook. So let's hop over to Outlook first, then we'll come back to Newforma. And let's say that we have an email here that we received about inspecting the door placement. So we're like, okay, well, we need to have somebody assigned to inspect the door placement for the conference room. So from this email directly, instead of just filing in project and filing the email as an email, we want to file it as an action item. So we're going to choose the bottom part of this button and we're going to say file as. And first we get the option of what project we want to have this item associated with. So we're going to say my Alpine Grove project. And you'll see here that there's a long host of things here. So if you have contract management, obviously you see all the contract management items, but just know here I can say new item, action item. And okay. And it will bring up the form. And like I said, this form will be exactly the same form that it is in New Forma if we were creating the action item directly in New Forma Project Center. But a lot of the form is already filled out based on the email itself. So the subject will be the subject line in the email. The body of the email will come into the description. The email itself is actually copied and placed on the email log tab. So the bonus here is when we create the action item from the email also gets filed to the project at the same time. And you'll notice here, even before we say create, in the categories here in Outlook, we can kind of see behind the scenes here, it's already tagging it in the categories as filed by New Forma so that we know that this email has been filed to the project. So some things that we would fill out, obviously, if we knew who we were going to assign this to, we would say assign to. If we wanted to associate a discipline to this action item, we could choose the disciplines. And this is a keyword list for those of us that are administrators. We can change the keyword list for disciplines. So your discipline list might look different than mine. But notice this is not a required field. We can also set the priority, so low, normal, or high. It's going to auto number our action item, but again, as an administrator, we could set the auto number to be different, either manual entry auto number or with a prefix based on type of action item. And the type list is here in the dropdown. And again, this is a keyword list. Out of the box, the only thing in that list is action item. I've added a couple of others here just to give you some ideas. The status is a list of these, right? I've added a couple of extra ones in here. It actually stops with action completed, but not started, in progress, waiting on someone else. And then I have deferred, completed, and action completed. Now, the difference between completed and action completed, it usually is down to external people. And a person outside of your company, if you assign them an action item and they access the action item on Info Exchange, they will not be able to mark the action item as completed, because you can imagine if you assign something to somebody outside of your firm and they mark it as completed and then it kind of falls off the table, right? It falls in between the cracks for you and it's not really in your field of vision anymore because it's completed. We don't by default allow external people to mark things as completed because that way it's still on our radar. But they do have the ability to mark it as action completed, meaning their action is completed. They're like, you assign this to me, I've done this item, so it is action completed for me, which means that now somebody internally can have the chance to review it before it gets marked as completed. You could also use this internally if you knew that, you assign something to me and I know that somebody needs to go behind and review what I've done before it's actually completed. Then even if I'm an internal person, I could still mark it as action completed so that I know, okay, now it can go to the person who just needs to verify that I did this. I could just mark that as action completed. And then I've also added some additional things here in the keyword list. Just know that if something is marked as action completed, the percent complete will automatically fill in here to be 100%. And the action completed date would also be filled out. The assigned to, not required. I could CC people. I could also, the assigned by will also fill in when I fill in the assigned to. So let's say that I'm going to assign this to Bob, my external person. I could also assign it to Adam, and I can CC myself if I want to. But notice it's going to fill in the assigned date, and then I could just check the box for due date. And it's going to automatically calculate, in my case, the default of my system is 5 days from today is the due date, 5 business days. So it's going to fill in next Friday. And if I wanted to, I could turn on the remind. And the remind will start at whatever threshold I set here. It could even be 0 days before the due date, which would fire on the due date. And it will fire to anyone that is assigned to this action item if the status is not completed or action completed. So if it's anything other than those two statuses, it will fire a reminder to the individuals that this is assigned to once a day, every day until it either hits completed, action completed, or I turn off the reminder. If the person is being reminded of multiple things, just like we talked about before, multiple emails are not fired. It is actually one email with all of the reminders on it. So you probably know who you need to remind and who you don't. I can even turn this on if I was assigning it to myself just to remind myself. But I can turn that reminder off if I choose. And so I've got it
So,
assigned.
sorry,
Yeah,
just
go
a quick
ahead.
question.
Go ahead.
Uh, Whenever we add people on the list, for example, assigned to or
Hmm.
CC or so on, those people need to be part of the uh, project team. Is that right?
They do not need to be part of the project team. Only if you wanted them to be able to update it on Info Exchange, then they would need to be on
Oh,
the team with web access. But when I choose the assigned to, I can choose from team members. I can choose from all contacts. I could even type in an email address. So it could really
and
be
I can type
anyone. They don't need
not
to be on
only
the team.
address. Okay,
Hmm.
okay. So as long as we have email address, we can assign people.
Yep, you could. So I could assign
Okay,
this to myself and just type in my email address, even though
okay,
I'm not on
great.
the
Thank
team. Yep.
Lori, expanding on Alex's question, you can type an email and they just get an email. They do not have access to our info exchange, so they would not be able to mark it as action complete.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. But they could just reply to the email and say, yes, I took care of this. And then you would file the email to the action item. You would relate it to the action item. And then you could go in manually and modify the status if you wanted to. But by all means, if you're just doing something super quick and the person's not in there yet and they're not on your team yet, but you have their email address, you could just type it in, or you could just pull from the all contacts. They wouldn't necessarily need
Okay,
to have web access. But if you're trying to encourage them to use Info Exchange, then I would want to make sure that they were on the team with web access before I assign the action item to them. Because that way, when they get the email notification, they would have the link on the email notification for the action item that would allow them to just go directly to Info Exchange, log in, and go right to that action item to be able to update it.
excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I have my assigned to, and then you'll notice down here at the bottom, I can tag it with a keyword. So if I wanted to reference a certain space, or that it was part of construction, or that it was, design or whatever, I could choose from the existing keyword list, or I could type in whatever I want down here just to tag it with a tag so that it makes it easier to find it down the road if I want to. A lot of people also will put in those things into the type drop down if they're pretty consistent across all of their projects, just so people can choose it from the type. So if I do assign it to someone, remember the assign to is not required when I create this action item. So if I don't know who's going to do it, I could leave it unassigned for right now. But if I do assign it to someone, I want to say send change notification email so that an email is generated that I can send to the people that it's assigned to and any people that are CC'd, so that they know that this action item has been created, they know when it's due, they know who it's assigned to, etc. It does me no good to assign it to somebody and not let them know. So here I'm going to say send change notification email and create. And so when I create this, it's going to create the action item in new form. It's going to file the email as related to the action item, and the email itself will pop up. I could add in some additional text in here, but just notice it does show them when it is due. They know who it's assigned to, they know who assigned it, they can see all the text related to that item. And if they're internal, they can click on the link to see it in new forma. Or if I was only sending it to external people with web access, they would only have this bottom link to see it in Info Exchange. So because I'm sending it to one internal person and one external person, both of these links are here, but an external person would not be able to click on this top link because they don't have access to your desktop version of Newforma. They would just click on the second link. So if I send this, you'll notice it in the subject line, it also adds this kind of tag at the end, and that's automatically generated by Newforma to indicate that this is a Newforma item and which project and which item it really is. So you'll notice in the upper left, it does not say send and file in project. It says send and file in action item because it knows that this email is related to a specific action item. So in this case, we're going to say send and file an action item. So it's going to send the email to those individuals. We'll look at it in a minute as related to Bob. And if I look now at my due within the next 8 days, here's the action item that we just created, inspector replacement. And if I move this up just to make it a little bit easier to see, I can see down here at the bottom the description, the email, so I can see the email that the action item was created from, as well as the email that was sent when we assigned it to those individuals. And then if there were any related items or a change log, the related items is really good. Like we talked about when we did our contract management workflow consultation the other day, I can relate the action item to existing Newforma items. So if the whole reason this action item came about was because we had a meeting or because of an RFI or a submittal or a file transfer or something, I can actually relate this action item to any of these Newforma items. So I do have the ability to relate it to an existing item, as well as I can even create a new related item from this action item, but I can really do that at any point. So we have the action item created. To take a look at it from an external person's point of view, so Bob gets the email from Howard. He can click on the link here to go to Info Exchange. But like I said, if you're assigning this to somebody who doesn't have web access and they're external, they wouldn't have either one of these links. They would just see all of the data down here and they could just reply to the email and say, yes, I took care of this, or no, this really should be assigned to so-and-so. And you could just receive the email associated to the action item and then make those modifications internally through Newforma or through the Info Exchange website. So we'll take a look at that as well. But because Bob has web access, let's go ahead and click on that Info Exchange. So again, it takes us to the login screen. We're going to log in as Bob, if I can remember his username and password today. And because we clicked on the link within the email, it takes us directly to the action item on the Info Exchange website. And Bob can see, if there were supporting documents or anything, he would be able to download those here. And then he can modify, up here at the top, he can modify that action item. And he could say, okay, well, it's in progress. Maybe it is, 50% complete. And if he had any kind of notation that he wanted to make, like the reason why it's not done is because we had bad weather or something, or because he couldn't get into the building or what have you, he would come over to the discussion and he could add some notations here. So you could come in and say, could not access building, locked. That way he has some kind of way to make a notation. And that way it's associated to the action item. And he could even turn on or turn off reminders here. But if he makes any changes into here, when he does the save and close, he can send a change notification to let everybody know the changes that he has made. And he can even change, like I said, he can change that status. I changed it to in progress. But you'll notice here, there is no completed because Bob is external. He can only mark it as far as action completed. He cannot mark it as completed because he is external. So we're going to say save and close. And because the send change notification email is checked, we're going to get this pop-up to send the email. Now it will fill in all the details for what has changed when it actually sends the email. But Bob can still type in some additional information in here if he wants to. He can also have a copy of the email sent to himself so he can see the email that was sent to everyone else. But he can just say send, and it'll send the email. Now, it doesn't go through his Outlook. It just goes back through Info Exchange and sends the email. And if we come back to the action items, remember, external people only see things that they are a party to. So Bob would be able to see all of the open action items that he either created and assigned to somebody, or they were assigned to him, or he was CC'd on it. Anything that is overdue has a little exclamation point here, and he can even add new action items from here, as well as he can export what is in this table to a PDF, an XLS, RTF, CSV. So he can even create his own reports from here and print them off on, if he wants to. But again, if there are other action items that he is not a party to, he will not see them. But notice he can still see closed, deferred, action completed, due within the next 8 days. He can kind of filter all of these down. But again, he would still only see ones that he is a party to. So even if he says all, he's only going to see 16 action items down here at the bottom. When we're logged in as Howard, we see much more. So if we go back to Howard's perspective and we were to look at all action items for this project, there are 45. But because Bob is not on all of them, he does not see all of them. So when Bob updated that action item and it said send change notification email, Howard actually gets an email. So here we can see the email that was sent here. So it was that it has changed, right? So we can see down here at the bottom what changed. So here we've got the comment. We can see that it's now in progress. The comment that was added, no problem, so that I have a record of kind of what was updated. Now it's up to me whether or not I filed this email with the action item. It already tracked it with, it already tracked the changes here in the action item itself. So if we refresh this now, it's now in progress. On the change log, we can see that, assigned to, right? So Bob, status changed to in progress. It's not going to keep a notation of the discussion. The discussion item is just here, but we could file the email to the action item directly. It still has the tag on the subject line, so we could just say file in action item. So it's going to file the email in the action item, and if we refresh our screen now, we should have 3 emails related to the action item. Okay. So if Bob had just emailed me back and said, yes, I took care of it, I could still file the email with the action item just like I did, but I would still need to come into the modify to modify it. So I would need to update it and change it to closed, or sorry, completed. And notice it fills in the action completed date and the % complete. And then I could send a change notification email just to let everybody who was involved know that it is now closed. I don't have to do that, but sometimes it's nice, especially if there are a couple of people involved, just to let them know, yes, it's been completed. And it will just pop up that email, and I can see here the change summary. It changed from 50% complete to 100. The action completed has now been filled in, and it went from in progress to completed. And even if I forget to say send and file an action item, if I just say send, because the tag in the subject line is there, Newforma will double check and ask me, are you sure you don't want to file this email with this action item? So yes, send and file in the action item. And now it should be in my completed or my closed. Here's my inspector placement. And I can see all of the emails associated. I can see all of the change log that has occurred. And notice even in the related items, I can still create related items or relate to existing items. The workflow is the same, whether I do it in Newforma for the creation, or whether I do it creating it from the email, whether people update things through InfoExchange or through Newforma directly. It really makes no difference. It tracks all of it together with that particular action item. The reporting that's available, if I were to look at, let's just say all open, I don't want to really worry about the closed. If I do the create report, I have two types of reports available, just like before. I have the log report, which is standard. What you see is what you get. Whatever columns, whatever line items, in whatever order, that's what that report will show. So whatever columns I had in that table, ID, status, due date, priority, whatever I'm showing for whatever line items, that's what that report will show. Whereas when I do the create report and I choose a specialized report, I have all of the ones that have been pre-configured by Newforma that come with your installation that I can choose from. Anything that is a Word-based document or Word-based template will have the DOCX after it. If it is not, then it will be an Excel or HTML type of template. And so here I could already have it grouped by status or by responsibility, or if I had images, I could run a report. If I had photos or something that I had added as supporting documents, then I would be able to see those. I think I have some in here. Yep. So I can see the report with the images in an Excel format, and I could email that out to people. But I don't have to change any of the columns. I don't have to move anything around in the table. It already has the columns chosen for me. So I don't have to worry about modifying anything within my table. It will just automatically pull the columns that are configured for that particular report. Now, remember, if you still want to use the create the log report and you wanted to move columns around, you can drag and drop the columns in whatever order. You can also right click on any column header and uncheck or check columns to show them or hide them. Like if I wasn't using type for the type of action item that it is, but I wanted to pull in days overdue, and then maybe percent complete, and I wanted to move things around, then of course I can drag and drop things around so that when I do the log report again now, it will look a little different. Now the discipline is over here, the priority, the due date, all of that is a little bit different. I have now the days overdue, the percent complete showing. So it really depends on, if you want it to print the reports the same way that you see your columns, just set your columns the way that you would like. And then anytime you do the create report, the report will look exactly that same way. And it doesn't affect anyone else, and it is across projects. It will just stay that way until you choose to ever change it. Okay, so for an internal person, just to show you on Info Exchange, it will look very much the same way. So if I come here to Info Exchange and log in as Howard, and I say, I didn't have to say view there. Here's the action items directly. I can see all of the action items. I can even split it down into assigned by me, assigned to me, all, and the all that I see is all 45 versus just the 16 that Bob sees because he is external and only sees things that he is a party to. In both cases, either internal or external, you can add action items to the project from Info Exchange. So if you happen to be out of the office, you're in the field, you just have a web browser, if you log into Info Exchange and you want to capture something, by all means, you can add an action item and even assign it to somebody and even send them a change notification email to let them know that they have been assigned the action item. So it's just a nice way that is a little bit more flexible if you're not on VPN, maybe you're on your phone. You can do those items as well. And just like the external person, I can export this table into a PDF, XLS, RTF, CSV. Okay, questions on action items?
Laurie, I have one question.
Sure.
So if you're anything that's done on action item through Info Exchange, you have to come back and update in your client center. Whatever you do within the client center, like sending emails, it automatically gets tagged to that action item. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you do it through Info Exchange, as soon as you save it, when you come back into Newforma, the change will already be there. It's not like an Info Exchange transfer where it's pending until I receive it. That change would automatically flow back through into Newforma.
I do recall that you saved Bob's email in the action item. It did not automatically got saved in that.
Oh, correct. Yes. So that incoming email here where he made those changes, all I did was I said file an action item to actually save the email as an email log for that particular item. So here, if I'm back in my action items and I'm looking at the closed or the completed, that was simply just to save the email here on the email log tab. The changes that he had made through Info Exchange had already been affected in the action item. Saving that email does not change any of the fields. It's just adding a copy of it here and filing the email to the project. But the email change, like the changes he had done through Info Exchange, as soon as he said save and close, those changes flowed back through to Newforma. I don't have to even receive the email yet to be able to see those changes.
Okay, good, good. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Good.
that's
So
good. Question? Any others?
just another one. So basically, our description will remain throughout the life cycle of the action items. That
Correct.
remains the same, changed. And then all discussions, the going back and forth, that happens on the next tab, and that's where everything is logged.
Correct. So if it's through email, I would just file the email to the action item. But if it's like a notation where he's saying, well, it's not complete yet because we had to do XYZ, if he is filling that out in the info exchange, then they would do that through the discussion tab because the description of the action item does not change. Like the item that needs to be done still remains the same,
Okay.
but all of the discussion around why it's not done or what changed or things like that, that would actually be through the discussion tab or through email.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, no problem.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so just so that you all are aware, you can also add similar action items. So if you had a similar, like I have the inspect door placement, maybe that needed to be done in several locations in a building or what have you. Instead of having to retype a lot of that same information, I could just say add similar action item over here under the tasks, and it will open the form and it will populate everything in just as it was on the original, even including all of the emails, but I could delete those. But I could just have all of that created again, and maybe I put, conference room B. So if I do have similar action items, I can just say add similar right here. And then that way I can kind of add a similar one without having to do a lot of heavy lifting. The other thing that you will notice is, let's say that I have the all open action items. If I need to change a lot of these fields on a lot of these items, so let's say a lot of these should have been normal priority instead of high, and maybe the due dates were all wrong. I could technically go into each one and highlight it and say modify, but the easier way to change a lot of items or a lot of fields on a lot of different items is to say edit in spreadsheet. And what this does is it pulls everything that's in the table right now out into an Excel spreadsheet. And I can modify a lot of different things in here. So let's say a lot of these should have been normal priority. I could just in Excel, I could copy and paste this in here. Let's say I want to change that. And let's say that some of these should have been in progress. So maybe those and that, and maybe those should have been in progress. And then maybe we realize that it's assigned to someone that is no longer there. And we're going to say maybe Adam should also have been assigned to this one and this one, who knows. So I can make a lot of these changes, and then all I have to do is click the X in the upper right hand corner and say save, and then it will pop me back over to New Forma. And if I say okay, it will bring all of those changes back into New Forma for all of the items that I updated. So now it's going to bring those back in. It's going to modify all of them and bring those back in. It's going to resend notifications if like the assigned to changed or if different items changed. I'm not going to worry about sending all those because there were a lot, but it would bring in all of those because I have a lot of them in here. It would bring in all of those changes now to all of those action items so that I wouldn't have to go into each one individually and say modify. I have a lot of emails that are invalid in my training environment, which is why I'm getting all these Outlook notifications there. But that way I don't have to go into each one and change them individually and say, okay, I can kind of do it in mass. So you do have the ability to do that. You can also, if it was like only one field, maybe the due date needed to be changed for all of these, I could simply highlight them all, right click and say changed field value, due date. And let's say I want to make it next Friday. I could just update all of those and it changes that due date to be next Friday. Now you'll notice when you're looking at these are now in black, and that's because they are not overdue. If they are overdue, they will be red. And if they are closed, they're like a lighter gray. So if I were to look at, let's say here, might be a little bit easier to see. So the dark black ones are open but not overdue. The red are overdue, and then this light gray are ones that are closed or completed. So visually, you can kind of see what you're looking at here and which ones are overdue, which ones are high priority. You can always just say all overdue and just look at the overdue ones. And if you're only interested in the ones that you are a party to, you can always click the little guy right up here and change it from 3 little people to 1. I'm actually on all of these, so it doesn't really change, but I could see just all the ones that I'm involved in. So I could see all of the ones that are assigned to me that are overdue, or sorry, all the ones that are assigned to me or overdue assigned to me. And then that way I can look at just what is high priority for me. But again, this stays a sticky setting up here until you change it. So I just click on it again, and then I'm looking at all overdue, not just all overdue assigned to me. Okay, questions?
No, that Excel spreadsheet, that's really neat feature. That's great.
Yeah, that's in a lot of places in Newforma, just so you know, but the action items is where it's used most commonly, is the edit in spreadsheet is very helpful there. Cool. Okay, so let's go back to our project home and let's talk about meeting minutes. Now, how are you capturing your meeting minutes now? Are you just doing it through like Word documents? Are you handling it some other way?
So we
Word documents.
we go through Word documents, and then we are also trying to use the SharePoint site for the meeting notes.
Uh-huh.
And we also are using a Excel spreadsheet that looks very similar to what we have in new format to action item lists,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still Excel spreadsheet. Then after the meeting, we would capture everything into one PDF file, all the items that were changed, and then we would distribute that among all attendees of the meeting.
Okay. So with the new Forma meetings, it's a way for you to be able to capture the agenda and relate any discussion items before the meeting occurs. And then once the meeting occurs, you can kind of record your meeting minutes. So you can say, well, I invited these 5 people and only 3 people attended. So I'm going to CC the other 2 people when I send the meeting minutes so that they know what we talked about. But then I could also capture all of my meeting minutes. I could update any discussion items. So if we realize that we needed to talk about an action item and during the meeting we realized, oh, this person already took care of this, I could actually mark the action item as completed so that when I send the meeting minutes out, it will show the action item, but it will be marked as completed so people know that that was updated. And that way I have a nice PDF kind of form that I can send to people. And I can even send it through Info Exchange so I can track if people download it, but I could send it through email just as easily. But that way I have kind of all of the meetings associated to the project. And at any time, I could come back to a meeting and I could say view form and I could take a look at the meeting minutes. So in this case, I don't have a lot on here, but I could see this one hasn't occurred yet because it doesn't have a meeting time, but I could see like when the meeting was supposed to occur, who was invited, what we were, what was on the agenda, what discussion items were related. And then when the meeting occurs, I could always come back and look at the meeting minutes at that time. I can also track series of meetings. So if it's like a weekly meeting, bi-weekly meeting, and I can even go back to any of the prior meetings and open up the prior meeting itself and even see any of the discussion items or look at the form, etc., and be able to see all of those meeting minutes as well. So that way, even if you're not in every meeting or people come and go on a project, you would still be able to go back and look at all of the meeting minutes and meeting notes for those particular meetings. So just like an action item, I can create it directly in Newforma. So I could just say add. And these types of meetings that you see here are a keyword list. So if you wanted to change them for your project, you could modify the keyword list and have that applied to that particular project through the settings so that you can control what shows here. You can also add the meeting from an Outlook meeting in here, like in your calendar. And if it's a meeting that already exists, like this is a recurring meeting that is a weekly meeting that already exists in Outlook, if I wanted to create this meeting in Newforma so that I can track like the agenda and the discussion items, I could just highlight that meeting and I could say here, say open the series. I could say send and create new forma meeting. Now it's not going to create the Outlook invitation. Outlook is still Outlook. Outlook controls all of the invitations. New forma will never do that, but it's more tracking the agenda, the meeting minutes, creating that form that we could then associate to the meeting if we wanted to, or we could send separately via email. But if the meeting already exists, I could say send and create new forma meeting, choose my project similar to when we did our action item. And then when I get my form, a lot of the form will already be filled out and it will be grayed out because the Outlook meeting is the one that controls this. So the title, the start and end, the recurrence is already, it's weekly. That's already filled out because it comes from the calendar invite here, the people that are invited. And then for the meeting content, what I would do is I would set the agenda. So I would come to the agenda and I would say, set the agenda. And I can either copy from a prior meeting that has been created in new forma, or I could say not to copy it, and I could just copy and paste an agenda that I might have in a Word document into this field here. I'm actually going to copy it from a prior meeting, so I'm going to say structural update. I'm just going to pull that over, and I have that agenda populated in here. I can still modify this though if I wanted to take some things out or add some things in. And then for my discussion items, if there were any discussion items or new forma items for discussion that were related to that meeting that I copied from, those will automatically come over to this meeting. So if this was a follow-up meeting to a prior meeting, you could copy over the agenda and you could copy over all the discussion items, but it will show you the current status of that item. So you'll notice here, this first action item is completed. So it doesn't need to be discussed during this meeting. So I could just highlight it and say remove. It doesn't remove it from new forma. It just removes it as a discussion item for this particular meeting or series of meetings. And what's nice here is I have like all my action items, I have RFIs, and I could link other project items to this meeting series that I know that we need to discuss. So I could pull in things like submittals, I could pull in site visits, to field notes, contracts, change orders, whatever I want to. So let's say I'm going to pull in a submittal that I know we need to discuss. And then that way it's part of the form when we create it. So I'm not capturing any of my meeting minutes yet. And I'm just setting the agenda, and I'm going to be able to create a form that I can then either email or save it and just add it to the Outlook meeting. But I generally tend to just send it, because what happens with a meeting series is when we capture our meeting minutes, say for the first meeting, those meeting minutes actually become the agenda for the next meeting in the series. So it becomes almost a living agenda. It's not really static. So we have all of our discussion items. We have our agenda. Just so you know, you can also color code it for the calendar in new forma. So when we look at that calendar, we'll see it here, and it's going to be color coded this bright blue. So what I'm going to say is view form and send meeting minutes down here at the bottom, and okay. And even though I've created this, I could still go back and modify it. It doesn't lock it in any way, shape, or form. But here, let me make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So it would have your logo in the upper left, the date that the meeting is supposed to occur for the first meeting, the agenda, and then all of those discussion items. So our shop drawings, our RFIs, our action items, all that good stuff. And it has like the people that are involved. And then if I wanted to send it, I can just say send. I can either send it as an email attachment or through Info Exchange. I'm just going to send it as an email attachment. No problem. And it's going to be attached in an email to Bob. He was the only one that was invited, but I could add other people if I want to, and then I could just say send and file in meeting. So just like before with the action items, it's just attaching the email to the email log tab and filing that email to the project. At the same time, because I created the new forma meeting from the Outlook meeting, it actually puts a tag on the end of that meeting subject to indicate that it is a new forma item. It is a timeline item, and it's stamped as filed by new forma. So when I come back into Newforma and I refresh my screen here, and this one's actually a series, but here we go. That's the one we just created. And I can see here that I could open upcoming meetings. This is very helpful if you wanted to change the date or add something to the agenda for a specific meeting. So maybe if you had to move it because of a holiday, or you wanted the start time to be different for that one meeting to accommodate something else, you could go into a future meeting and modify anything that's in there. But the email still gets set with the attachment. Then when the meeting actually occurs, all you have to do is open the meeting, just that one specific one. And in this case, I'm going to say record meeting details for when the meeting actually occurs. So let's say the meeting actually occurred today instead of Tuesday. And we're going to say it occurs 10 a.m. We're going to be ahead of the curve here. And the two of us were here, but maybe I also want to CC some other people on the meeting minutes. And when we come to the meeting content, I still have all of my discussion items, but the meeting notes are actually going to be the agenda copied down here. So we could say, could not perform to be discussed at next meeting. And then, if we had some other items, we could add them in here. But as the meeting occurs, or even after, so even if you keep your notes on in Word, or you handwrite them or whatever, you can always just go back into Newforma and either cut and paste if it's in Word into the meeting notes, or you could just, append the meeting notes when you get back into Newforma. But if there were any of these items that got completed, or if we needed to identify a new action item, I can always just double click on the action item. And I could say, okay, this one is now in progress. And we're not going to send a change notification because maybe Mike already knew that it's in progress. Maybe that's why we updated it. And then if we identify a new action item, we could just say identify a new action item. And we could identify it from here. It's the same form that we had before. And then all we have to do is say view form and send meeting minutes, just to get a look at what that form is going to look like. And my form looks a little wonky, so you'll have to excuse the formatting issues that I have on mine. Sometimes we're playing around with the templates, trying to change things. So of course we can see like when the meeting was supposed to occur versus when it actually did occur. Who did we invite versus who actually attended, and if we're CCing anybody. Then of course all of our meeting notes are down here for our minutes. And then if we had updated anything and we had set it to complete, it will still be here. It will just be marked as completed. So that's waiting on someone else, waiting on someone else. In progress, I think it's down here a little way. I had a lot of stuff on here. So open. Oh, I must have missed it. Must have been back there somewhere. But it would have been marked as completed. So I would have had that marked as completed on the form itself. Or in progress. Oh, I think I changed it to in progress. So it would be marked as in progress. And then all I could do is say next is to send. So then when it creates that email, in this case, it's going to have that updated form with all the meeting minutes, and it will be addressed to the people in the to and the CC, or sorry, the attendees and the CC will already be filled out. And then I could just say send and file in meeting. So that here's the meeting minutes for the meeting that just occurred. I could see all of the emails associated to it, any related items. So all of those RFIs, action items, the meeting itself, the submittal, all that good stuff is related here. And then any kind of change log. I set the agenda, I actually sent the meeting, and then I have the agenda, the meeting minutes, the discussion items, the email, all of that is still kind of stored here. But the series itself is still here, so I could still open upcoming meetings. So if I open that next meeting, so I still have those items on here, no problem. And then see how that agenda now flows over from the meeting minutes of the prior meeting because I had updated the meeting minutes. So that just becomes the agenda for the next meeting. So I don't have to say now, what were those changes? It just kind of flows through into that next meeting. And then when we capture the meeting minutes for this meeting, it would flow through to the agenda of the next meeting. So if you do have a series and you have it created in Outlook that way, it does create that way in Newforma. If it's just a standalone meeting, by all means, it will just be a basic meeting. It won't have series after it, and it would function exactly the same way. So the form is exactly the same way, no matter what type of meeting it happens to be. It is always the same form, and you enter everything that you need to with the meeting content, with the agenda and any discussion items. And then when you actually have the meeting, that's when you say record meeting details and you would enter your meeting minutes. But even after you record the meeting details and you send your meeting minutes, if somebody else comes to you and they say, oh yeah, I got that email you sent me, but we forgot that we also talked about these 5 things, I could still go back into the meeting and append the meeting minutes and then send the meeting minutes again. So it doesn't lock it. It doesn't mark it as final or anything like that. You can always come back and modify it. It would just capture any changes in the change log. So it would show here that maybe you updated the meeting minutes or the meeting notes, or you changed a discussion item or something like that. You would see the person, the name, date, time, and what was modified, so that you could still have a record of that available to you. But like I said, you can create the meeting either from Newforma or you can create it from Outlook. Those meeting types, just to show you as an administrator where that's controlled, is here in the Edit Project Settings. Here on the Timeline tab, these are all of the meeting types that are available for your project. So again, if you wanted to remove any of them, add some new ones, edit them. Like if you wanted every time you have a contractor meeting that it's color coded a certain color, or it's called something different, then by all means you can modify these. You can add new, you can delete some if you need to. So just know that you guys can control that directly. Questions on the meeting minutes before we move on to the project timeline?
So I have just one question. So basically, if I understood this correctly, one way to associate or to link meeting minutes with the action items is to go and create a meeting, and then under related items we would add or link all the action items that are relevant for that meeting. And then as we go through the meeting and we update those action items, the actual action items will be updated at the same time.
Right. So you wouldn't have them under the related items will automatically fill in, but where you actually relate them is under the discussion items. So if I was here, let's just say modify, they automatically flow through to the related items, but where you actually place them is here under the discussion items. This is where you say link project items, or you copy them from another meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And then when they're added here, they automatically become a related item. But the difference being is that if you place them here, they don't automatically flow back through to the discussion items, because related items could also be other things that you're not really discussing, but maybe the whole reason that you have this meeting is because of an RFI or because of another meeting or because of a file transfer or something like that. You can really relate this to anything. So I could relate it to an action item, but I could also relate it to another meeting. So
here we can have supporting documents or anything that could be potentially related, but doesn't necessarily need to be discussed.
Right. So that I would put, if they were documents, I would put them here under the supporting documents. But if it's like another Newforma item, then I would just say another project item, and I could really browse to any of these. So it could be, some record documents from document control. It could be a proposal request. It could be another meeting. It could be a transmittal. It could be any of these types of items. But if it's just a supporting document, then I would just add it under the supporting documents tab.
Okay, very, very good. I think this. And then through Info Exchange, we can also create the same meeting minutes, can we, as the
No.
internal?
So meeting minutes and through Info Exchange you're only able to see them and print them. You can't modify them. So that's for both internal and external. I can come into any prior meeting, like the one that we just captured, and I can see the meeting minutes and I can print it, but I can't modify any of it. It's more read only.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's meant to always be controlled
In
by
most of the cases,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, in most of the cases, well, we will have a new format client on the laptops, and then when we participate on the meetings, we will just use the client.
Okay.
Uh,
Yep. And even if you don't, even if you just capture it through like a Word document, you could always come back later into new forma and just say modify and then say record meeting details and then just copy and paste into the meeting notes. You could just copy and paste right into here if you already had it in a Word document.
yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
That
So
works
even if
well.
you like, if you're somewhere that doesn't have internet access or you can't get through VPN to get to your desktop environment, then by all means you could just copy and paste into there.
Okay, good.
Yep. And I know you guys need to jump off for a meeting, so we'll let you go. But and then Nadia will continue on with the project timeline.
And the remainder of us, yes.
Yeah, it looks like Les already left us. So the project timeline is really for the project calendar, and we can view it in three different ways. So the first way is the log view, which really only shows scheduled tasks, phases, and milestones. So we'll talk about phases and milestones in a second. The scheduled tasks would be things like the synchronization schedule for a shared folder. So when we set up a shared folder and we say, okay, every day at 6 a.m., this is going to synchronize, this scheduled task would actually be shown here. So you do have a way of being able to see that within the log. The other two ways here I think are a little more helpful. The journal view allows you to kind of scroll left to right, week to week, and be able to see this is the weekly meeting that we just set up. So we color coded it to be that bright blue. I can come in and actually double click on that meeting at any time and be able to modify that occurrence of that particular meeting. I could go ahead and do that. I could also come into any of my other meetings, and I can, even if I click on the little filter up here at the top right, I can make sure to include things like action items, milestones, phases, but also notice I also have due dates for RFIs, submittals, bulletins, etc. And when I choose these items here in the filter, that does stay a sticky setting for me across all projects. So once I set it once this way, I don't have to change it. But even note, I do have some action items in here. I could even modify the action items directly from here. I would not need to go back to the action item activity center to modify them. I could modify them from here and then just say send change notification email at the bottom, and it would update in the activity center as well. I wouldn't have to update it in two places. You can also skip ahead by clicking on the date up here at the top. So if I wanted to see what was occurring, a few weeks ago, I could just have it go that way, or I could scroll. So I do have that, and I can even highlight multiple days if I wanted to, and be able to, see if there were certain things in there that I needed to highlight. But I could also export the image of this for a start and end date, let's say just from the 1st to the 7th. And I could export that out into a calendar view so that way, if I wanted to send that to somebody, I could. I could also send the calendar via email to someone if I needed to. And then that way they could have that calendar available to them on, as their calendar as an overlay. The other things I can do here is if you have MS Project, you can say import from MS Project. I don't have MS Project installed, which is why it's not an option for me. I could also import meetings from a spreadsheet. I would have to use the new format import template. but I could import those from a spreadsheet if I wanted to. And the bottom one here is to add to Microsoft Outlook and subscribe to updates. It actually creates a separate calendar in Outlook that I can overlay on top of my existing calendar. So that I can see meetings, phases, and milestones that are occurring for that particular project that I may or may not be involved in. So I can easily kind of just overlay it. It doesn't change my personal calendar. And at the top of every hour, it will synchronize with Newforma. So if new meetings or phases or milestones got added or were changed, I would see those being updated within this project calendar that I can, like I said, I can overlay at any time. So I can just have that overlay on top of my personal calendar if I want to. The third way is to see it as a calendar, so similar to a regular Outlook calendar. Right now I have the weekends being split so that Saturday is on the right and Sunday is on the left. If you want to see the weekends on the right, you can just choose that option here, and then that way the weekends are already here. And of course I can scroll between months, right? So if we take a look here, I can see that weekly meeting that's occurring. I can see all of my action items. The other things that we can see here is we can also change this to be a week view versus a month view. So if I wanted to see it more like a planner on my desk, I could see it that way. And then I could even see it in the month view, and I can even filter by team member. So if I only wanted to see things that certain team members were involved in, then I could filter down to just those particular items if I wanted to. That happens to be covering everybody, but if I wanted to take that off, there we go. But I could see all of those. And just like before, I can filter to show certain items and not others. The other thing that you can see here that you would see on the Outlook calendar would be phases and milestones. So from here, I can add a milestone or a phase, and the milestones and phases are covering either a length of time in the case of a phase, or a milestone would be like a deliverable for a specific day. But in both cases, they are not assigned to anyone, and they do not fire off reminders or anything like that. If I wanted something like that, I would just create the action item. But in this case, let's say that I have my SD, well, let's say 30% DD drawings. And I know that the deadline for those is the 1st of October. And I'm going to color code it in red. And I want the entire team to see that, or I could say just the internal people or selected project team members. And the reason why I have this is because the calendar is also available on InfoExchange to both internal and external people. Obviously, external people only see things that they are a party to, which is why you do have the ability to restrict this to just internal people being able to see this on InfoExchange. So if I add that here, and there's my DD drawing milestone. If I were to come to InfoExchange, to the project website, it doesn't send any notifications or anything like that. If I come down here to my project calendar, let's go ahead and change this to, let's see, go a couple weeks out. It probably just hasn't updated yet, but it will show that milestone here. It usually takes a minute or two to get to InfoExchange, so we'll give it just another minute. Maybe it'll show up. But we would have the ability to see those meetings, phases, milestones on here. And we can even download and subscribe to Outlook Calendar directly from here if we were on our phone and we wanted to create it as a separate calendar on our phone. Then we could do that. The other thing here is the add phase. So if there was a certain phase of a project, if I had like my whole, my DD phase, and I could say that's from the 18th and it's going to go through the 12th of October, and I'm going to leave it as this light blue. And we could just say internal project team if we wanted to. And then that way it will add it here. So I can kind of see these things filtering through. And then of course it would wait until the top of the hour to synchronize here to my project calendar here within Outlook. But then if I'm looking within Info Exchange, there's now my milestone. So it just takes a couple minutes to refresh here. But then once we give it a couple more minutes, it would also update and show me the phase as well. So I can kind of see all of these going on. I can also look at this as a month view, just like I can through the desktop environment. If it is Bob, and he has it turned off so he doesn't see the project calendar, so he's not going to see the project calendar on this one. So we must have updated the permission sets so that he doesn't see it. But if he did, it would be a similar view here, except he would not see things that he is not a party to. So for example, this weekly project team meeting, if he's not invited to it, he would not see it on the project calendar at all. He would only see meetings that he's invited to. He would only see phases and milestones if they were made available to the entire project team. If they were internal team only, he would not see them. So here's our DD phase showing up. Here's our milestone. But Bob, as an external person, he would not see this DD phase because we made it internal team only. So he would not see that one, even if he had access to it on Info Exchange. You can also print this. So if you wanted to filter down to only certain types of items, maybe the action items aren't a big priority, maybe the meetings are, and maybe certain deliverables are for, say, the people at the job site, you could actually filter down to just those items, then say print, and you could choose a timeline for it to print. And then you could choose the layout, either 1 page per month or 2 pages per month, displaying the weekends or not, and then actually print it out or email it to them. You could do a trifold style or what have you. And then you could print it out and email it to people, or print it and then send it to them so that they could have it in the job trailer. So you do have the ability to kind of print that out anytime that you want. Questions?
No, I think this is, so we would probably use this to define the major milestones in a project.
Sure.
And possibly phases.
Okay.
And that I think that would be all. But and then all the team members, we can also bring these during the meetings and tell them, hey, this is coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. That's how I. Yeah.
And even if you were working on a laptop somewhere else, as long as you knew how to get to Info Exchange, you could even bring it up like during a meeting from any web browser. As long as you knew how to get to the login screen, you could log in and then just bring up the project calendar from there and show people. So even if you're not on VPN with your desktop environment, you could do that as well. Great.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
awesome. So that's all that I had. If you guys didn't have any other questions, I think we're done for today.
Oh, that's great.
Okay, so I'll send you, Nadia, I'll send you guys the recording a little bit later, either this morning or early afternoon. And then if you have follow-up questions as you're going through things, feel free to reach out. And then I think we have a training next week for RFIs and submittals, I believe. And then we'll go from there. Okay?
Okay,
Yeah.
great, Lori. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You all have a wonderful week.